Hello and welcome everyone from the IET Anglian Coastal Local Network, which constitutes members from around Norfolk and Suffolk area in the UK. Also, a warm welcome to everyone who's joined us from outside these areas in the UK, as well as people from all over the world. My name is Afolabi Agbede, and I will be your host for today. We've got a very interesting talk lined up tonight. I think it's time for us to introduce our speaker for today. We have Adam McGill, who's a voice architect from BT. Tonight, Adam will be speaking to us on the topic of voice, and specifically he's titled his talk today as the decline and rise of voice communications, which makes me very curious actually. So I'm looking forward to see what Adam is gonna tell us today. Adam has got over 30 years experience in this field, so I'm sure he's gonna keep us well entertained. Right, so thank you very much. Adam, over to you.
Okay, hi everybody. So I'm Adam McGill, Voice and Unified Communications Architect at BT. And thanks, AFO, for the introduction. I shall start sharing my slides now. This is a phone box in my home city of Bath, which has been repurposed into a flower bed. There are many other uses for telephone boxes, defibrillators and libraries and showers in people's gardens and things. So they're showing their usage. Right, so I have been in the voice business for 30 odd years, but telephony itself, switched voice telephony, public telephony, in the way that we understand it now is probably come up for about 100 years with some key attributes that are still with us. So we still use telephone numbers as identifiers, we provide dial tone, devices ring when you're receiving a session, and the architecture that drives it all is centralized. But during the time that we have, we've moved from the last 30 years or so, there's been lots and lots of innovation to add features and functionality to the basic telephony service. So I'm going to talk a bit about innovation and some attributes around innovation which aren't necessarily disruptive. I have a general view that I've used for quite a long time when explaining architecture and roadmaps that we have in our fixed and mobile and other product lines as well, is generally there's three things going on in any industry that you're in. There's always the old stuff, there's the current stuff, and there's the next stuff. And at any time, you'll find that usually all three of them are in progress as well. You'll have one that's declining, one that's growing, and the one that you're investing in and is most of your money and your resource is put into. And sometimes you can surf these waves from old to current to next, and some waves it is organic evolution. So the incumbents and the usual way of doing things carries from the old stuff to the current stuff, and sometimes the next wave is actually a disruption. And there's lots of examples of this. And organic evolution was things like when LPs moved to CDs, there was a big change in the technology, but the way that the artists were paid, the distribution channels, the shops, even the device manufacturers who made hi-fi all survived the wave from the old to the current because it didn't break that model. Then we moved to MP3 and the internet, and that came in as disruption into the next wave. And we saw a big crash in terms of record stores, distribution models, and even the way initially through things like Napster, how artists were monetized for their activities. And there's lots of examples of how this works. There's a book which is now about 20 years old, was written part of Harvard Business School, a chap called Clayton Christian, who came up with the innovator's dilemma. And his basic premise was two basic premises. One, that the shape of the curve as you move from old stuff to current stuff to new stuff is S-shaped, and as a new disruptor comes in, don't know how much I was doing that, then it'll start off with a very small amount of market share. So whilst the incumbents are focused on the current stuff, a small portion, whether it's a niche market or a less good product, is starting to appear on the fringes, but it will move up that S-curve shape to the point where it then becomes the main driver of the next stuff wave. And examples of this are things like Kodak with their films. They knew perfectly well that digital was coming, but the quality wasn't as good, and what they focused on was making their core product better by adding things like digital information to their films. But their whole distribution and production and processing model didn't fit with the next phase. So even though they invented digital photography, they were taken out by digital cameras, which eventually appeared in phones. Blockbuster is the same. They made the move from tape, VHS tape, to CDs and even Blu-ray, but their distribution model didn't take account of moving it to the cloud. So the likes of Netflix and Amazon now control the video distribution business, and Nokia, whilst in the 90s being the major provider of mobile phones and having built internet tablets, which look very much like the iPhone, didn't put those two together because they didn't want to disrupt their current stuff model, and they were taken out by the likes of Apple and Samsung, who moved into the next stuff wave. So it's well understood in industries. People who look after the evolution of products understand the theory of this. It's just when you have a cash cow that's generating lots of revenue, it is always easier to make that better and more efficient than it is to try and move to the next disruption model. I also have another theory why companies find it difficult to move to the next stuff, and that's because drawing S-shaped curves in PowerPoint is really hard. This is the equation for drawing an S-shaped curve, and I think that the first thing you should teach anyone who's in marketing and product development is how to draw S-curves in PowerPoint. So let's see how this waves of innovation have played out in the world of voice. So what happened between the first pictures that I showed and the current wave is organic evolution. So whilst we moved from fixed telephony to mobile telephony, and we've moved from circuit switched TDM to IP telephony, and we've moved from premise-based PBXs and contact centers to cloud-based applications to drive IP-based phones, the actual customer experience stayed pretty much the same. It was based on dialing numbers, getting dial tone, making calls out of the blue. And also the architecture that drives it stayed pretty much the same as well. It was a core application and core servers driving the functionality between the two. Just let me move that on. So what's happened in that first move from the old to the current is we've moved from having analog voice, POTS phones being driven by centralized exchanges. We say that the new service is called digital voice. Actual voice in the core has been digital for over 30 years now. It's just the access technology over the copper pair that drives your phone is analog. And what we're moving to in the current wave is moving to having that being based on IP protocols down to your device, running over the broadband service that you have to your CPE, either on fiber to the premise or fiber to the cabinet. The lots of reasons for doing this. The main one is that the existing TDM core is well past its end of service life date, and it also is very distributed. The processing power that was available when it was put in and the reach of the analog lines was such that it requires sort of 5,500 buildings with 5,500 either remote concentrators or core switches in them to drive the 35 million odd phones in the UK. Moving to digital access, which is is distance agnostic once it's coming over the IP channel, can be run from 6 to 8 nodes in the core, all based on the IP multimedia subsystem and an application layer called a telephony application server. So we can significantly reduce the number of buildings, and from a climate point of view, massively reduce the amount of energy that we consume. BT is one of the biggest consumers of electricity in the UK, and we're moving that from those 5,500 local exchanges into 8 cores. The CPE still has to be powered, obviously, so we're moving a lot of the power consumption into the CPE, but that's required for broadband anyway, so that will be powered up. Right, now what I'm going to move to now is I have a couple of slides from Openreach. The link I've got on here will take you to their guides on what the impact is for the whole of the UK industry on moving from copper-based access to IP access. And I've picked out a couple of key elements from that. I'll just quickly go through as sort of a public service announcement mode for the next 3 slides. So the first piece is what's getting taken away today. In your either a business or consumer premise, your voice line is a copper line that goes to your street cabinet and then is carried all the way back to one of those 5,500 local exchanges. It has DC power coming down it, so you can, when you pick up the phone, it'll get dial tone, and is the power that makes it ring. And also, not just phones use that service. People use it for point of sale terminals, for monitoring things like water meters, for access to building entry systems. The emergency buttons in lots of traditional lifts are connected to copper access, and obviously business and residential phones. Also lots of locations where you have emergency phones in public transport, or out on remote locations, or where Samaritans need lines, or for the Coast Guard. They're all powered by the copper line. So what happens with the migration to all IP or digital is that copper link between your street cabinet and the telephone exchange is removed, and the access is either fiber to the cabinet, so you get your broadband from the cabinet with still the last few hundred meters being a copper drop, or if you've got fiber all the way to your premise, then you won't even have the copper for the last access piece. When does this happen? Whoop, that's moved on. So the service, that driving of that copper line for doing voice, is called wholesale line rental. That's how it's bought by all the CPs that use it in the UK, including BT, and that will be shut at the end of 2025. That means that the current voice services, ISDN 2, ISDN 30, and the basic analog lines will all be withdrawn, and the CPs, BT and others, will need to have migrated their customers by that date. And that's a process that we are currently involved with, and we're migrating thousands of customers across from their analog-based access to their digital-based ones. To facilitate that migration, there's a rolling program of stop sell, which means that new analog lines can't be provisioned or changes made to the existing ones. And the date for that is different across the 5,500 exchanges. The trigger point for that is when fiber to the premise has reached 75% of an exchange area. And if you go to that that OpenReach web URL, it has the dates by local exchange area as to when those trigger points will be. Okay, so in BT, what does that look like from a customer's experience of how they migrate from their existing analog voice service to their digital one? This slide is a kind of cut out and keep diagram. So if you have any customers or relatives or people who want to understand how they can migrate, this is the way that BT do it. For some time now, we've been sending out new Smart Hub 2s, which are the ones that we use for VDSL, fiber to the cabinet, and also we have a variant for fiber to the home. Whoops, go back. And on the back of those hubs is a analog terminal adapter. So basically, that's moving the slot that was driving your phone it's moved it from the local exchange into your hub in your house. So if you have an existing analog phone or decked phone, the process of migration on the night that we inform the customer that they will be migrated is you unplug your phone from the whichever kind of master adapter endpoint you have in your home, and you plug it into the green port in your broadband router. And there's several options for doing that. The first option is you can take your legacy phone and move it across. Our preferred option is that you take a new phone from us, which connects directly to the hub. The hub is a decked base station, and our new digital phones will directly synchronize with that hub and provide high definition voice rather than the narrowband voice that you get on your legacy device. If your phone is not near where you have your broadband, we also have a adapter which connects by DECT to that base station, but moves that green ATA to a plug-in box that you can have in another location in the house, or if you have a second phone in your house that you also want an analog phone that you want to connect. So you have three main options for that. From a customer experience, the number moves across, the dial tone and the way you use the phone and your voicemail all stay exactly the same. So it's not too much of a disruption. The main difference is if there's a power outage, you're not getting the power down the copper anymore from the local exchange, so the service will stop working if you have a power outage. If you're in an area that has regular power outages, or if you don't have mobile coverage backup for your phone and you need it for emergency services, then we have uninterruptible power supplies that will sit between the power socket and your hub, and will run for about 10 hours. The hubs consume about 700 milliwatts, and the batteries in the units are about 7.2 amp hours. The batteries in them are replaceable, So after a few years, if they're not holding the charge, they can be swapped out. Okay, AFO, we now have a poll here because what I wanted to work out was whether people have been moved yet onto a digital phone, even if or do they know they've been moved across onto a digital phone, or are they still on an analog phone? So if we can start that one, or possibly you don't know. So hosts and panelists, I can't vote. Oh, okay. Right. Thanks, AFO. That'll keep going? I think. I don't know if it's got a timer on it. No. Right. So back to my 3 waves of technology. If we move on to the.
That's the result of the poll.
Okay. I can see that. Ooh. Okay. Right. Yep. That's about what I would expect. Actually, in terms of migration, we are about that way across. What we're also seeing is that the migration isn't required because that 14% that don't have a fixed telephone, there's certainly a demographic that don't need it anymore. They've moved either to entirely mobile or to other ways of communicating. So yeah, that's pretty good. Okay, thanks, Afo. So here we have, going back the last 20 years, that wave that took us, the organic wave that took us from fixed voice telephony to mobile voice telephony, back in the turn of the millennium. It's about 80% of all voice traffic was fixed, mainly driven by coverage of mobile networks, the cost of making mobile calls, particularly outside to other operators, and the availability of handsets. The migration has been a nice kind of S-shaped curve. It's starting to flatten out now on the fixed. We're getting to kind of the base of that S, and mobile has taken over that position of being the dominant current piece. But what we get is, so what happens to the next wave? There's that sort of block there, which was people communicating more and more, the cost of communicating coming down, so elastic demand. And so what happened at this point here of inflection where the new block comes in? So I've taken it at about the year 2007. That's been that inflection point, and some key things happened in around the year 2007. Ofcom's communication market report that year got to the point where 50% of households in the UK, had broadband, at least ADSL, so that's at least a meg, possibly 2 megs worth of bandwidth, which is plenty enough to do voice calls over. It was the year that the HTML5 draft came out, which predicated on opening up the ecosystems for APIs. So it made it easier for producing in-browser and connecting to app-based communications. The key one for that year was the iPhone was launched, and it put into people's hands a computer which could run apps for communication purposes that above what was being done in telephony. It was Skype's 4th birthday. After a long time at that sort of disruptor, low 5% of usage, it started to get traction. It's the point at which it passed 10% of all international voice calls. And keyly, they realized that they needed to embed it in other spaces as well. The first place that Skype was embedded in was a service called MySpace, which was sort of the pre-runner to Facebook, but they understood that you needed the context of the people to communicate. It was also the year that Android as an operating system beta was released. So all the elements were there for the disruptors to come in and start providing reasonable communications. And there were thousands of them. Thousands and thousands of people took all those core elements and started making communication services to compete with voice telephony. Many of them didn't survive or got amalgamated. The key ones that are in there, we've got Skype and Zoom and Discord. Some of them were playing in particular niches. So Discord is an application used predominantly by people in games to communicate with each other. And then there were particular business ones like Microsoft Link was aimed at the corporate market. Okay, and we have another quick poll, AFO, which is which main unified collaboration platforms do people use?
The poll is open.
We'll come on shortly to the technology that the difference between where the telcos have gone with their current way and the way they use IP, and the way that the disruptors have come in to work with the very different environments that they've had to work in. Okay.
And the results are in.
Yeah, that's good. Don't have many gamers on then. If we've only got 4% on Discord. But yeah, it's interesting that Zoom and Microsoft Teams, Microsoft have announced in the last couple of weeks that they think they've overtaken Zoom in terms of global usage, but it is pretty neck and neck between the two at the moment. Okay, can you close that? Yeah, good. Right. Okay, so the the main attributes of voice communications are the same as to whether you're app-based or whether you're telephony. So the key one is identity and policy, is how do you know who other people are and how do you find them? Telephony, we still use E164 numbers and use that as a public addressing system. The disruptors use private identities. Sometimes they use proxies. People like WhatsApp use a proxy of the telephone number, but it's actually a private identity. And people like Apple use their Apple identity, and quite a lot just use emails as the identity for how you find other people and connect to them. On the telco side, signaling went through a lot of stages of trying to emulate the old TDM signaling systems, moving from C7 and Q931 and eventually ending up on SIP, which is where we are now. And the disruptors started on SIP and were the main instigators in developing it. In terms of functionality, on the telco side, very much trying to not disrupt the customer experience. So the list of features that you get on digital telephony, both in the business and consumer world, is very much the same and is backwards compatible, whereas the disruptors embedded with their APIs started adding functionality, particularly things like instant messaging, IM, emojis, short format video, all kinds of different multimedia experiences that were less easy to add to the base telephony piece. On the IP side, telcos very much went for the control and quality of how to get into the IP domain. Some of the disruptors took very novel routes, like making two calls into the core to get through the firewalls and then bridge them in the middle. Location, the core piece of a telephony side on location is the beginning number, your area code, which town are you in, whereas due to the ecosystems of APIs, on the devices, the disruptors were more easily able to access the global positioning system capabilities of the devices and use those and expose those in the way that people communicate as well. So you can actually see where the person is that you're talking to. And probably the key piece difference between the sort of the current telco way of viewing the world and the disruptors, and the piece that was most disrupting was monetization, how people are charged for using these services. Both fixed and mobile was very much usage based. Even if it's bundled into a unlimited minutes package, it's still monitored and measured and counted how much you use a service. Whereas the disruptors had different ways of monetizing it, mostly on extracting user behavior, working out the preferences of end users and selling that analytic information on to third parties, or targeted advertising, depending on the context of where you are and what you're doing. So if you're walking down a street and you walk past various shops, they can tailor the pop-ups and narrative that they send to you. So very different ways of monetization, but to the end user, basically the disruptors had no cost of entry, whereas the more traditional telco one is still based on a subscription model. Okay, architecturally, the difference between the two, both fixed and mobile, very around control and managing the core of the network. So lots of elements in the core, in an IMS core that looks after both fixed and mobile telephony, a lot around policy, what is an end user allowed to do because they're being charged for it, and also a lot around peering, because the whole piece around multi-countries and multi-operators in a single country is that the services need to work between multiple operators because it is a public telephone service. So so Vodafone and EE and Three can communicate with each other. So they have to fix to the same standards and peer with each other. So that's why they all fit with ITU and 3GPP architectures. On the disruptor side, because they own the whole service end to end, and just use the internet border gateway protocol mostly as a way of communicating, is you can grow organically and you don't have to worry about peering outside of your domain. So they can grow as much as they want, and they can even do things like end-to-end encryption, like WhatsApp can do, which is harder to do for the telcos because you need to be able to read the signaling as you pass it from carrier to carrier. The disruptors and the telcos also have a different way of dealing with providing a good end user experience. The telcos started with having very dumb edge devices, possibly even analog edge devices. So the codecs that were used for the voice transport either had to have no computation required, such as PCM, G711, or as light computational power as possible, whereas the disruptors are from the beginning working in a very lossy environment where there'll be lots of packet loss. So the focus was on building codecs that could rely on the computation capabilities of the end devices to provide a good end-to-end quality experience. The standard telco codecs were originally narrowband, so they went from 300 to 3.4 kilohertz. The human ear can, certainly young people, can get up to about 20,000, so that's called full band. On the telco side, that balance between edge computing capability and backwards compatibility means that both fixed and mobile, the standard codec is now G722, which gets you up to 7,000 hertz bandwidth. On the disruptor side, they innovated more and more around how much compute the edge devices needed to do to improve the quality of the codecs. Started off with the internet protocols, and then moved on to Silk, and the current standard that nearly all of the various applications use is now called Opus, which can provide full band and full band stereo at something around 100 to 150 kilobits per second. There's, with the introduction of even more processing power, Microsoft is moving from Opus, which it currently runs Microsoft Teams on, to a new codec called Satin, which is still in trial, which can get super band bandwidths of fidelity from as low as 6 bits, kilobits per second. It's also very good at dealing with packet loss, because it's got built-in redundancy, so it sends in a second copy of the sample in subsequent packets. So if you lost a series of packets, you can still recreate the audio experience. On the mobile side, we have the same as well. We have a thing called an enhanced voice service codec, which sends multiple copies of the same packet, which is the one that's used in 4G voice over LTE, and will be used in voice over new radio, which is the 5G codec. That also has the capability to go up to full band stereo, but for backwards compatibility reasons to G722 and even to G711, it is most mobile operators in the world limit it to the same bandwidth as G722, so that it can be transcoded and transrate. It doesn't take a lot of compute in the network to transrate it. Lots of new developments coming at the application side. We get spatial audio. Facebook and Microsoft Teams are heading towards having positional speech. It basically is just delaying one side of the stereo. So if you have stereo speakers or headset, it will place the position the person you're hearing in around you. Useful for when you've got multiple individuals on a group call. With added computation power, and for this you need things like geographical processors. Voice can be identified in the sound channel and isolated. So currently, if you have a NVIDIA graphics card or even a powerful phone, you can run that and it will pick out your voice and isolate it from road traffic or any other noise in the background. And going the other way, there is wide spectrum codecs as well, which will particularly pick up the surrounds in the background, which is useful if you're trying to transmit a film or do some kind of nature studies and things like that. Okay, so what's happened more recently in terms of where we are with fixed voice and mobile voice. This is the last few years going down their waves of technology. Fixed and was declining at about 10% a year, and mobile was staying fairly flat until COVID came along in the beginning of 2020, and both fixed and mobile got a big boost to start with as people started working from home and working remotely. Those two went back up to levels of traffic that we probably hadn't seen for 10 years on the telephony side. But usually when people started, particularly in the corporate space, when people started receiving the bills for those 2 quarters of increased telephony use, we saw a boost in the amount of the disruptors traffic that came in, and it's quite significant, the S-shaped curve that they went up. It got a significant boost from COVID. These numbers are really just for a narrative purpose. They're they're from various public reports from the hosted unified comms carriers. I won't say which one's which, but you can probably match the colors to the different vendors. And to put that into context, I then have the 2 put together. So this is for the UK, and our estimate at the moment is that the amount of traffic on the disruptors unified comms portals is gone beyond the total amount of telephony in the UK, probably heading towards twice as much as being used in telephony. Okay, now how that view of the change between the telcos and the various ecosystems, I've gone back to 2007 again here. This is the about the top 20 telcos value in terms of their share price back in 2007 against some of the main disruptors: Google, Microsoft, Apple, Cisco. So total value of all that back then was about 1.5 trillion pounds. If we take that forward to today, which I think it'll do, there we go. The total value of the same companies is now just over 8 trillion pounds. The actual value of the telcos is about the same. These two are both on the same scale. So if you look at sort of AT&T or BT, they're kind of like the same kind of value, but they are being dwarfed by the total value of the ecosystem players. Now, that's, obviously their value isn't based purely on their unified comms and collaboration capabilities, but in terms of the size of the ecosystems against the telcos, you can see how they fit together. Even Zoom, which didn't exist in 2007, is now got a valuation about the same as a major country's telco. The little green box in the top right hand corner is Discord, which even itself is the same as a smaller country's telco. So just to start wrapping up a bit, we've got is this bad news for telcos? Well, not really, because voice itself is a fantastic user interface and is starting to appear in more and more verticals and more devices that telcos and the big ecosystem players can both work together with. We're seeing the emergence of telcos converting themselves into digital communication companies. So voice as a standalone service predicated on telephony identities and point-to-point dialing outside of the context of the workflow or the activity that you're trying to complete is definitely in decline. But the telcos that provide the broadband and are providing Internet of Things ecosystems themselves and embedding things like security and quality and identity in a way to connect these ecosystems together can work in partnership with the proprietary and lockdown ecosystems to enable voice as a UI in increasing the amount of environments. Voice is a great UI. It's fairly cheap. all you need is a microphone and a speaker embedded in any kind of devices. So compared with a screen or something that needs a keyboard, it can be a very low cost of entry. It's also a very fast form of UI. Conversation can run at 100 to 150 words per minute. On a PC keyboard, you do about 30 to 40 words per minute. And if you're typing with your thumbs on a small screen, you're probably down to 20 to 30 words per minute. So voice as an embedded UI is faster. It's also very convenient and safe because you can use it while you're driving, while you're doing other things. It doesn't use up your hands, and it can be relayed back to you without you having to look at a screen. It does have some disadvantages. It's very linear. Unlike if you go to a web page and browse, you'll be maybe given the top 8 answers for what you're looking for. Using voice as a UI puts more emphasis on using artificial intelligence in the core to try and get the single readout response to be the correct one for the end user. It can be less accurate. Multi-array microphones are picking up voice much more clearly now, and the computation to put it into context means that the speech-to-text engines are getting up to about 95% accuracy. They really need to be up in the very high 99% accuracies for it not to be annoying as a control mechanism. Okay, I think that brings me to the end of my presentation. So I think AFO, if we've got some questions, we can maybe start going through those.
Super, thanks. Thank you very much, Adam. That was very, very interesting. I think I particularly liked the way you simplified and explained the coexistence between the legacy, the current, and the future innovation, the dynamics between all three, and also how it links into the disruptors and also existing telcos. So I think that was really good. I did say we're going to be entertained, and you delivered. So thank you very much, Adam. I'm sure there are some questions, and at this point, I will hand over to my co-host George, who's been collating, I guess, questions in the background. George?
Yes, thank you very much, Adam. Hopefully you can hear me.
I can.
And I'll run through the questions, and I'll try to spread them across the questioners as well, because there are some people who have asked multiples, and I want to make sure that we work across the piece. Question from Salah. He asks, has the regulator defined the network termination point for the voice service?
No. It's up to the CPs to define how they want to deliver digital voice. So the regulated piece is how the broadband is ordered. It's called snappily called single order generic Ethernet access, which is the sort of the base broadband that you get from OpenReach, if that's who you're using for your access provider. But how you put a voice service on top of that, and how you put that in, either as in your hub, your router, or if you have a standalone ATA, or if you don't provide fixed voice at all, that's down to the individual CPs as to how they do that. So that there doesn't need to be the same sort of CPE experience across all of the carriers, if that's what the question was.
Thank you for that. Question from Tim Welch. And Tim asks, given that for many people their landline and nowadays broadband too serve as their lifeline, what are BT's plans to support high availability and low mean time to repair for vulnerable customers relying on their home telecoms services as VoIP rolls out?
Yeah, so absolutely right. So the universal service obligation is still in place. Broadband obviously is not as reliable as analog, Lots of reasons, possibly people using Wi-Fi in their own homes to distribute it, or power outages that I talked about. There are many ways that we look at the customers, how they get resilience. Obviously, we have a Halo 3 product, which will switch over to the mobile network should the fixed line access be broken. So if someone puts a digger through your fiber, it will switch over automatically to the mobile network, and we talk through the vulnerable channels as to how we do that. Where mobile isn't available, we are looking at there's probably around 50,000 houses that are going to not be covered by broadband or by mobile, and there we're looking at sort of point-to-point radio solutions, and in the extreme we're also looking at satellite solutions to cover the last few bits of the UK which are not going to get economically covered by fibre or by mobile.
Matt Melbourne asks about PSTN replacement support on ADSL 2+. He suggests that there's a lot of ADSL 2+ still in operation in rural areas, and do you believe that the BT fibre to premise, fibre to cabinet rollout will keep in step with the replacement strategy?
That is the route to do that, is that those ADSL will be being replaced by fibre to the prem and by where there's fibre to the cab as well. But yes, the rollout for is to accelerate the amount of fibre to the prem out there, both funded by ourselves and by the government to cover those gaps. So is there a gap between it and when we turn off the PSTN in 2025? There is a number at the edge, and that's where some of those alternate access methods I answered the last question with come in.
Okay, question from Jim. Why do so many voice over IP providers shoot themselves in the foot in their competition with near dominant mobile apps by requiring a mobile phone number for registration and authentication?
It's the identity of last resort. Particularly, I guess in the early days, they were very poor at identification security. With things like GDPR, they've moved to two-factor authentication, and particularly using a SIM card as that anchor for identity. Basically, they're relying on the telcos to have done the diligence, and when we issue end users with the SIM cards, we check their identity, so we know through their credit rating or through utility bills how they've got that SIM card, and then they rely on that. So it's I don't think it's shooting themselves in the foot. What they're actually doing is exploiting the security and diligence that the telcos do to help with identifying their end users. So I think they're actually taking the opportunity of the work that the telcos do, even though it means that there's still a number in the background, but it is increasingly just more of a identity token than necessarily being used. And also it's the identity of last resort, because things like making emergency calls still falls to the telcos, and most of these disruptor providers will either put stickers on their devices or tell you in their apps they're not to be used for emergency calling. So that's why I got to the piece at the end about it being an ecosystem and a partnership between the two, is that telcos provide a different part of that whole customer experience, and we can work together to with the telcos sort of leveraging the identity and security side of the triangle, and the application centric ones doing more in terms of innovation around video and virtual reality and augmented reality and things like that.
Right. Question from Charles Brookson. With denial of service issues, some UK operators such as Vodafone have suffered. Are you doing anything to make security better? It's clearly a serious issue for SIP and for spam calls if someone has your SIP URI.
Yes. So in terms of just straight denial of service attacks, we monitor the IP addresses that are being attacked, and we will swap out the IP address, put it into quarantine for a while, and issue the broadband users with a new one until things calm down. So whilst a session that you're on would drop if you had a denial of service attack, it will only last as long as until we provide you with a new IP address that isn't being attacked. In terms of all of the spam calls and phishing and fraudulent type calls, there is initiatives going on with NIC and with which is the Interconnect Forum in the UK, and the regulator Ofcom, to do some verification around the origin of calls that are trying to spoof banks and spoof carriers and spoof telcos, and put some verification on it. The US are slightly ahead of us in that. They have a system called Shaken and Stir, which is basically verification. You send a token with the call that says that you are allowed to originate a call with that calling line identity, to stop people from pretending to be banks, etc. But that's a industry-wide activity that we're working on with Ofcom as to how to implement that.
Question from Doug, a short one. Will the arrival of LEO satellite services introduce pseudo mobile landlines?
Well, yes, I think that what I was saying earlier is that some of the edge cases will be based on low Earth orbiting satellites. So things like, I can't remember what it's called. Anyway, yes, but there are phones that can operate with those. They obviously need line of sight to the low Earth orbiting satellites. So generally a fixed replacement. You put a dish in your garden or on your roof, predominantly for broadband, but can also be used for voice. We've trialed voice over those services, and the latency up to, because they're at about a couple of 100 kilometers high, is bearable. Using geostationary sort of satellites that have been used in the past have had very long delays in terms of the delay of the speech path, but low Earth orbiting satellites are much better. So yes, is the answer to that question.
Thank you, Adam. A question from Peter. All my phones connect through to a single cable into the back of my master socket. How will this change?
Right, so extension socket internal home wiring isn't supported anymore. So there's only the master socket. So what will have to happen is, if you've got multiple phones, is you need to use those deck extenders that were in one of the options of how you implement digital voice. That's for BT. Other carriers may do different things, but basically there isn't enough. You'd have to connect your home wiring into the hub, and it's not built to do that, to take extension wirings. It's just built to have a single phone plugged into it. So either the deck base station needs to be plugged into that, or you need to get those ATA plugs and put those around the house, but your internal wiring won't be supported once you've switched over to digital.
Okay, question from Ian, probably an interesting final one, who thanks you for an interesting presentation and notes his concern that since analog POTS voice quality is increasingly deteriorating, mobile and IP have introduced delay in digital artifacts, and he contends that any delay above 30 milliseconds in processing, the point at which side tone becomes echo, detracts from natural human conversation.
Yep.
This comes from someone who in the 80s was ran speech communications at BT Labs.
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at the performance characteristics of the codecs are very dependent on the speed and processing of the edge devices, and we have to ensure that we match the codecs that we use with the capabilities of the devices to keep that compute time down, which is why the codecs are getting a balance between the quality of the audio they produce and the amount of compute they take. In terms of perception, obviously it doesn't take very many milliseconds to get around the UK, but it can, something around that 30-40 milliseconds is definitely the point that it becomes noticeable. So yeah, absolutely right, if that was a statement rather than a question.
Okay, well, I'm afraid we've run out of time more or less for questions, but Adam kindly has agreed to take away outstanding questions and answer some of the obvious ones, and we will post these answers up when we have them on the ACN website, so that you can see the remaining questions. Unfortunately, we've got 25 outstanding, and Adam has to move on. Thank you very much, Adam.
That's fine.
Over to you, Afo.
Thank you very much, George, for moderating those. Very interesting questions, and thanks, Adam, for the efforts in answering the questions. And thanks for the presentation as well. At this point, I'll just again remind everyone that this session is recorded and it will be available in a couple of days on the IET community's website. Just as we are approaching the end, I'd like to quickly plug our next webinar, which comes up on the 11th of November, which is titled Taking Fiber to One of the Remotest Nations on Earth. And it will be, our speaker would be Ranulph Scarborough from Avaroa Cable Limited. Again, it's bound to be another very, very interesting talk. So please, it's highly recommended. I'd say you should look for more details and register on the IET communities link as shown now, or on the IET events website. On behalf of the IET Anglian Coastal Local Network, I'd like to say thank you very much for joining today's session. And also thanks to my co-host and everyone else who's made this session today a success.